What's going on, 3DMJers? Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. For those of you who are watching on video, you can see that I'm actually in the home of the Godfather. We're at the dinner table where Godfather meals are served. Spaghetti, meatballs, lasagna,
Garlic bread.
garlic bread,
Lots of garlic.
lots of garlic.
I'm Italian.
You make offers.
That you can't refuse.
That's right. So, So for those who don't know, we're recording this currently. We are both 4 days out from the INBF, WNBF, Washington State Natural Pro-Am that's been going on for 19 years, I believe. Something like that. 17 years?
Really? I did not know that.
Yeah. Well, we did it
In
in
09.
09 together. This is where you turned pro. And I got smashed on the overall for the second weekend in a row by you. Or I did not turn pro. And that was, 14 years ago. And it was definitely a show that had been on the books for a while at that point.
Yeah, because Brad won the year before, 08. Yeah, so it had to have been in existence for at least a few years before that, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So Kevin James, he was one of the promoters for that show back in the day, still was, and he recently stepped away, and Aaron Orton, WNBF Pro, has stepped in. He's doing a great job.
Yeah.
Just to really appreciate him for how much he's promoting the show, the communication with the athletes. It is a super pro qualifier and a pro-am. So what that means is there is a professional division for this gentleman, and it is a pro qualifier if a division class specifically has 8 people or more. I think it's 5 people or more for women's bodybuilding and fit body. So, for example, I'll be in the open middleweight. If there are 8 competitors in the open middleweight, then whoever wins that class, regardless of what happens in the overall, will get their pro card.
Which is legit.
It is legit. It's a big show. There's a lot of really good competitors signed up. And we just came off of my second show of the season last week. Jeff's been kind enough to have me here, staying with him.
Eating all my food.
Eating all his food, and by that, he meaning taking me to the grocery store. I bought all my own food, and I'm eating my own food. But, besides that, where I got beat by Lorenzo Elder, 3DMJ athlete, Godfather athlete, well-deserving of the win. I am happy to say it was tight.
It was very tight.
Thank you.
Very tight. I could have gone either way, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was like, I think Eric. I think Lorenzo. I think Eric. So it was really tight, yeah.
Yeah, when we came out, there were 7 middleweights, and they did not move Lorenzo or me a single time, and just by happenstance, our numbers were 47 and 48 in the middle of the lineup. So we were in the middle, and we never moved. They moved everyone else around us. So for those who don't know competitive bodybuilding, they move people in and around for comparisons. So I knew that we were in the 1 and 2 spot. And I was like, oh man, I guess that's better than getting moved around a lot. But so I wasn't sure how it was going to go. And the chips did not fall my way. But once I saw the pictures, and also I knew seeing Lorenzo, he's got gigantic arms, tiny little waist. You brought him in shape. He did some great work. He improved from his last show. And the man has already made some noise as an NGA pro. So he's definitely a worthy competitor, a worthy WNBF pro now. Yes, this is my 3rd opportunity to try to get my pro card this season. I won the WNBF New Zealand show 2 weeks ago. So this will be the Washington, 3 weeks in a row, me competing at shows. And it's been a lot of fun.
You're busy.
Yeah, I'm busy, but it's fun, man.
Busy, but you keep getting leaner each week.
And that is a good segue because we're talking about improving as a advanced athlete. Now, there's a number of facets to this that I think we can cover. One is the general perception, and I'm going to say myth online, that after your first 5 years of lifting, you've made all your gains as a natural lifter. If it's good lifting, quote unquote. Another aspect of it.
That means I'd be done 32 years ago.
You've been wasting your time for 3 decades.
Holy. Okay, I don't want to say that. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Carry on.
So, yeah, unfortunately, Jeff, a lot of time wasted. I'd say the other aspect of this is the reality of what it means for a natural athlete to try to make progress at an advanced level, the perspective, what it takes, how different it can look, what we do as coaches and how we view it, and how small things make bigger differences at a certain point in one's career. So it's actually a really interesting topic. And one of the things that it motivated it was yourself, Berto, Brad, and from comments online, people going, wow, like Eric, and Omar has actually been saying this to me a lot. Just how much my physique has improved from 2019, yet my stage weight, very similar. My level of conditioning actually in these first two shows was not yet reaching the peak of what I hit in 2019. So to be able to present my best physique ever in each of the shows I've done, and because my second show the week later after the New Zealand show was slightly better than the first one, and my New Zealand show was better than all of my looks in 2019, again, even though I wasn't as lean. So what did I do? What is contributing to this look of me having a more complete, symmetrical, and well-developed physique? And I think that's something I've been pondering, and I think it'll help people understand using my experience of why this isn't so cut and dry.
Sure. So, like, here's the thing: is like you didn't know you made these physiques or this physique change until 4 years later, which is like that 5-year window, right? So you spent 4 years trying to improve, and you don't get that result until you actually get down to this level of leanness. What did that feel like going through 4 years of like, is this things you're going to talk about here in a second? Like, is this really working?
Yeah, that's the tough thing, right? So as a physique competitor who is making marginal but very important and meaningful and visible changes, it is very difficult to see if those changes are occurring in the off season past a certain point, when your body fat is even moderately high. So I wasn't sure that I had made these physique changes that I had intended to make, which I'll talk about how I did that, probably until I was into March and April and of my diet. So that means I finished my season in August 2019. So I had to wait 3.5 years before I was like, oh, I think it worked,
Right.
So that is a huge challenge. And that's why when people say trust the process, you're sometimes like, what does that mean? This is one of the cases where trusting the process is a requirement. You have to essentially commit to a course of action and be willing to carry it out for a couple years at least. And then as a competitor, when you diet down, see if it worked. So this is certainly to give some credit to the people who actually say, hey, you don't make any more progress after 5 years. There is some truth to it. And I think there's truth to it for the general population. So what I mean by that is that one, the amount of investment compared to the rewards you're going to get as a general population lifter. If we're just talking about physique changes, maybe it isn't worth it to do the type of things we're going to discuss that I had to do and that others might have to do, or the time invested, and then, of course, dieting down to the point where you can actually visibly see it. And, maybe if 5 years of hard lifting, and then from that point on, it's maintenance. But more importantly, focusing on other things that you get out of your training, the enjoyment, the life lessons, the performance improvements. It's not just all about the way you look, et cetera, et cetera. So, because if you don't find other ways to enjoy and benefit from your training, you won't be able to keep those 5 years of hard gains, right? I think it's probably true that good training will give you 80% of your physique. But I think the 20% gains that you'll get over the next 15 years, for example, are more visually impressive than the 80% you'll make, because you're now being compared against what is typically, if you have decent genetics, a level that most people don't get to.
Right.
So I think you had a great example. You were talking about Usain Bolt.
Exactly. So in order to gain 0.1 seconds on his time, that's the difference between being a world record holder and maybe coming in 3rd or 4th place in a race.
Yes.
So it doesn't seem like a lot, 0.1. But I mean, if you think about that, that makes a huge, huge difference on an advanced level. And same thing in natural bodybuilding, right? Like you get down to 6% body fat, but now you take it down to maybe 5.5. Like visually, that is striking when you're that lean. So you could literally go from like being a bottom dweller in a show to all of a sudden you're like in the top 3 or something like that.
Absolutely.
But it can take you, like, obviously to lose that 0.5%, like it might take you another month, 2 months of dieting. Or when I'm talking about muscle mass, like it might mean like 3-4 years of hard ass work that you just visually can't see it until you like go through the entire process.
Yep. Yeah, I think I probably just kind of looking at my stage weight progression and where I'm at what conditioning level, I'm probably a pound heavier than 2019. But I mean, that's within the variation of noise on the scale on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
And the point is, though, is where is that pound, And I think a really interesting thing that I've seen in my physique is that my delts have had probably the largest and disproportionate impact on my physique more than anything else, as well as my lats.
Yeah.
So if you think about it, I've added maybe 500 grams of tissue to my body, but how much does it take to push your medial delts out visually another centimeter? 100 grams, 200 grams,
I know you can think about it. It's like,
it's not much.
Right.
If you think
slice that muscle off, you put it on a scale.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, that's a chicken. That's like a 4-ounce chicken breast.
Maybe. Yeah. So we're talking, 4 ounces is a little over 100 grams. So half the muscle I've gained has been on my delts. We're making shit up, right? Like we're guessing.
Yeah. But I mean, if you were to take the numbers, right? And if you weigh that over 4 years, like how are you going to know?
There's no tracking that. So, but I think the fact that my front lat spread in my first season, 07, my second season, 09, and then slightly less in my third season, 2011, was either my weakest or my second weakest pose. Now I would say it is my strongest or my second strongest pose from the front. Maybe the grab most muscular being the strongest.
Most muscular is probably the most dominant pose on you.
So
I would say, I think that front lat spread is probably, I would say it's second in line now.
Yeah.
Which it was definitely a weakness before. And that's something we assessed and recognized in past preps. So that was like your main focus is like, okay, I got to bring my delts up in order to make that waistline look smaller because your waistline isn't the tiniest.
Yeah.
It's not too wide, but it's like when your clavicles are narrow, you don't have that much width, then you're going to look more straight up and down.
Yeah.
So we kind of knew like we need to work on that. And that kind of leads into what did you actually do for those 3 or 4 years to actually make those delts more of a standout from the front?
Yeah, so I basically, through the years of assessment and talking to these guys and exactly what Jeff said, I thought, what do I really need to really focus on when I start getting into my bodybuilding specific off season? Because 2020, I was doing strongman, powerlifting, weightlifting. 2021, I was doing powerlifting. And then basically from the last 2 months of 2021 through all of 2022, I had a targeted off-season approach to bodybuilding specifically, and that's all I trained for. So maybe I could have made these gains in less than the 4 years to be a little more charitable. Yeah. And I specifically thought, I'm going to do specialization cycles. I'm going to do more volume with specific exercises for specific muscle groups. So for all of 2022, every day I trained, I started with delts, lats, and then calves in that order. Because I have good glutes, hams, and quads, but my calves have always been a little under. And I also have a very long tibia. And I thought, if I can make a noticeable improvement in my calves, it might make my lower body flow a little bit better. And I think we do see, these are probably my best my calves have been, but they've changed the least. And it's made the least impact on my overall physique because they're calves.
They're calves.
Yeah. But my lats have definitely improved, and my back lat spread and my back relaxed have improved probably the most out of my back shots. And I think they've helped a little bit from the front with giving me a little more of that taper to my waist. Right. But the delts, I think, made the biggest difference. And what I did is every session started with some variation on a lateral raise, typically in a lengthened position. So primarily cable in front of the body or behind the body, or just regular cable lateral raise.
To get more range?
Exactly. So one thing that I did for most of my career was just doing dumbbell lateral raises. And for those who've been listening and following along, if you think about where is the tension supplied when the lever arm is longest, it's basically right at lockout on the lateral raise. And that's also, unfortunately, when the muscle is the shortest. And we've got a lot of data now suggesting that that's probably not a great resistance curve profile if you're trying to grow a muscle. So just simply switching to a cable, real easy. Now you have a smooth resistance profile. And then if you can find a way to stretch the delt even more, now you're putting that tension at the longest.
It's more of a constant tension with that cable, correct?
Exactly. And getting that tension in the lengthened position. And that was something, because I think it was pretty novel to my delts, that it worked pretty well. And
because up until then, it was like for years, it was just like regular traditional
shoulder
dumbbell
press,
raises.
double lateral raise, rear delt fly, or pec deck, right? So, and it was fine. Like my delts weren't bad. It's just that I needed them to be like maxing out my potential to change my physique.
So you had to look for alternative ways to actually improve your delts, other than just, I'm going to add more volume. So you got a little more strategic with exercise selection.
100%.
What about rep cadence, as far as like slowing down eccentrics, positives? Did you do any of that?
A little bit. And it was more just about that same principle of putting tension on the delt in the lengthened position. So the research informed the big picture principle, but then some of the in the trenches work that Berto's been doing informed the actual practice. So for those who didn't pay attention, Berto's last season, which just was last year, he made noticeable improvements to his lats.
Yeah, he did. Big time. With
the same basic approach, probably less emphasis on volume and more emphasis on the quality and training at longer muscle lengths. And so I went to him and I said, hey, man, I'm doing the same thing, but also for delts and calves. What has worked for you? You've played around with this a lot. He's been experimenting a lot with the N1 techniques, Cassim Hansen, shout out. And so he gave me some guidance on the lateral raises. He gave me some guidance on the back work. And I incorporated a lot of movements that I got a good feeling for. And I did change tempo and the performance a good bit. I was controlling the eccentric for sure. And then pausing in the most stretched position. And then each rep trying to get into a more lengthened position. As you train at long muscle lengths, you can find that you get a little more range each time. It's probably most noticeable on calves. Because if you're doing, let's say, a machine calf raise, and those plates are getting a little closer together each rep, I would have like the goal of on the eccentric, try to get those plates.
So you're actually getting more skillful at kind of knowing where your starting and stopping points are.
Exactly. And in addition to the calf work, I've talked about this before, I was doing calf stretching with an orthotic device. And we actually
up at night when he stayed here doing that.
Yeah, so when I came to we went to, what show was that?
I can't recall offhand.
Yeah. So we attended a show here. It was it Worlds? No.
It wasn't Worlds. I can't remember. I just know we went to Olive Garden for dinner.
That's right.
Again, I'm Italian. We have to have Olive Garden.
Yeah.
The Bing, right?
Yeah, it was the Mayhem. I came out, we attended the Mayhem, and I was in the middle of my stretching protocol. I stretched on the plane with the orthotic device, and I stretched in his house and made noise on his wheelie chair and kept him up.
Yeah, you did.
Sorry. But we had athletes competing, and I was sticking to my stretching protocols.
You're forgiven because your calves grew.
Thank you.
All right, there we go.
Thank you. So, I was committed to the approach we took, and it was informed by science, informed by practice, and it was something that I did diligently throughout. So any day I trained 5 days per week was 3 sets of back or like lower lat specific targeted approach, medial delt targeted approach, and calf work. And I could tell that the calf work worked in the off season. I thought I could see my lats filling out because my shirts were fitting differently. But the delts, which I think made the biggest visual difference, I really couldn't tell until I started to get lean.
You get leaner, yeah.
And it did. It really did pay off. And I think, honestly, it was a game changer for my physique because of my structure. And now this lesson of saying adding a truly uncountable amount of muscle mass in terms of the time frame it occurred over made a very quantifiable difference in my performance as an athlete. So it puts different perspective on things. Instead of just looking at, okay, I can gain 20 pounds of muscle on my frame as like, that's my genetic cap. The difference between, 20 and 20.5 pounds is a lot different than, say, 10 versus 10.5 pounds.
Right.
So it's just like you were saying with Usain Bolt, where if you take his 100-meter sprint record and you knock a tenth of a second off it, he's placing third. You knock another tenth of a second off it. He's an Olympic trial guy, not even make the Olympics. You knock another tenth of a second off it, and now he's just a really good sprinter. But these are very, very marginal differences that if you were someone who was just, I want to be good at running, and you looked at YouTube comment, you'd be like, no, like you're not making any improvements. So perspective is everything. And for me, it's also important to note that the solution to what improved my physique is not necessarily the same thing that'll improve someone else's advanced technique. So if we go all the way back to 2009, this is when I first met Jeff, and I was taking overall just kind of aggressive approach. I'd say all the volume, all the frequency, all the failure. And my upper body actually regressed as I got more influenced by powerlifting, generally lower reps, more focus on strength, a little bit less volume, and further from failure. And then it also regressed while my lower body progressed in my 2010 offseason, where Jeff taught me how to train with a more HIIT style. So
those were my HIIT days. So gotta give him credit, because he actually was like, but he tried it. He's like, I'm going to go train with you. I'm going to commit to it. And you got some answers. It didn't work out the way I was hoping, but we didn't know that till like a couple of years later or so. It's like my upper body actually shrunk.
Yeah. It was interesting to watch it because we saw what you can see in the off season, which is primarily performance differences. We were training upper, lower on a 3-day per week rotating split. So it would go upper, lower, upper. The next week, it would go lower, upper, lower. And every time we came back around to leg exercises, I was making improvements every cycle. Mm. I think I got up to RDLing like 385 pounds or something stupid like that.
You broke my bar.
I did.
You broke my bar, man.
Yeah, sorry about that. But I also learned how to control the eccentric. I learned a lot of things about technique. Jeff improved my quality of training. But get this, my overhead press went down, which I thought was wild. And so I used that information and I went away from that approach, but I kind of went back to that whole power builder approach for my contest prep. Mm-hmm. And when it was all said and done in 2011, we were like, yeah, you were bigger from the waist up than 2009.
2009.
Yeah. I might have had a better physique than in 2011 versus 2009, maybe, mm-hmm. but I had actually regressed. So this was in my off season of 2011. I went, all right, let's go the other direction. And I finally first started. Remember, this is 2011. This is 12 years ago. What we consider high frequency now is different to what it was then. But I started doing 3 days per week upper body. And my body dramatically changed.
Yeah, you start blowing up.
I just, like immediately. And within a year, I had a upper body that was back to the way it was in 2009 and slightly better. Mm-hmm. And then through 2015, I made a lot of really, really good gains. And that's kind of what we eventually saw get realized in 2019. I had a much more balanced physique, but mm-hmm. I still didn't have the type of upper body mass in the right places that I needed to kind of tip me over the edge.
I think what's cool is that by going through that, like we're actually exploring. So if you didn't do that exploring, you wouldn't have known like how to take the approach 2019 to now. Because now more or less you kind of know as far as like your volume. It's not so much the acute volume, it's more so like spreading your volume out.
Yeah.
Like, because you're talking about like 3 sets for delts 5 times per week. Mm-hmm. Did you do anything else like on specific, was there any specific delt days, or you just spread it out 3 sets 5 days a week?
Yeah, I basically put that on top of a split that was a little more chest or delt dominant on each upper body day. Mm-hmm. And I did some experimenting in 2018, my off season before 2019, on what's the best way for me just to train generally, where I get the least amount of fatigue and the most amount of stimulus. And I was able to get more out of this kind of quote unquote full body approach than I was in upper lower. And what I mean by full body is that I wouldn't have intentional leg days.
All right.
Because I realized from the experiment with you, which was just as valuable as the things that I learned about my upper body, was that I really only need about 6 to 8 sets, maybe 9, maybe up to 12, if I actually want to make some and push to get some progress on my lower body for it to grow. And I'm actually not trying to get my lower body to grow very much right now because I'm still a little bit, back then at least I was lower body dominant. So that meant I didn't need to come in and do leg press, squat, lunges, leg extension, leg curl twice per week like I used to. I saw no regression at all, switching to doing maybe 1 leg movement per day. So some days were upper body plus hamstring curls.
Right.
Some days were upper body plus hack squats. Some days were upper body plus RDL. And there were some days where it was just a calf day plus
So it's
upper body.
full body, but kind of not full body. Anyway.
Yeah. Essentially, it's exactly what we talk about in bodybuilding program design.
So you're allocating your energies where they need to go.
Exactly. It's inside out programming. It's what we teach in our vault course that I really encourage you to check out, of how do you start with individual needs and then how do we distribute those over a split that makes sense for the person. So for me, I have fluctuated between a more quote unquote full body-esque or upper lower-esque, with the lower body sessions being very short. So for example, you saw my quote unquote lower body day yesterday. I did a leg press, an RDL, and then I did some lateral raises. And that was it. So I have these easy days. And now today when we train, it'll be a full upper body session plus calves. So that approach was something that was informed actually by 2018. So like you're saying, each one of these lessons that I've accrued, I then incorporate that information to make it more and more and more individualized approach. And, you know, there's a double-edged sword here. And then I found that doing more, training closer to failure, and training more frequently, amazingly, seems to work for me. Now, you know, that just sounds like Greg Doucette, like, just train harder, like, you don't training hard enough. That is true for me, for my upper body, but I can tell you as a coach, and I know you've seen it for yourself, and I can tell you that there are many anecdotes out there where doing less, doing something totally different, or finding a way, like, for example, Mike Israetel found that he was able to make more improvements in his physique when he trained further from failure, because he'd been training to failure so much that he wasn't recovering. And like I said, my lower body responded the same to less volume, and I just had less fatigue, which enabled me to do more upper body work, and my upper body responded really well. And now I've seen it 3 times where simply doing more or harder or more and harder or more and harder and more frequently has been a difference maker for my upper body. So what am I going to be doing this off season? Basically just picking different muscle groups. So Jeff was kind enough to kind of help me assess my physique, and we think, hey, you know, now your arms need to come up a bit. Now, like, your upper region of your pec could come up a little bit, and we still need to keep hammering your delts and your lats.
Yeah, because that was a big question. Like, okay, you still need to do a lot of volume for those other areas, but now we're going to do a lot of volume for upper chest and arms. How are we going to allocate that?
Exactly.
Thinking about your joints, the recovery aspect of all that.
And I do think the biggest thing is that I need to ease into it. That's one, which I'm sure Nick Licamelli will be happy to hear, you know. Expanding my envelope of function, and then 2, being very picky with exercise selection. Because when I just kind of train arms like a bro and don't think about it, my elbow tendonitis gets out of hand real quick. So neutral grip work, higher rep work, even BFR work, if I want to bring my arms up, is going to be really critical. And yeah, thinking about how that integrates with the rest of my training, because the arms are being used on every pulling and pushing movement. So they may have to get brought out front, you know, like if I am training the crap out of my biceps and triceps, they're not going to be able to contribute as much to a row or a press, which is fine, because that might mean that my upper pecs and my lats have to pick up the slack, but it'll mean me putting my ego on the back seat and seeing some of these exercise performances take a hit because I'm going in with fatigued biceps and triceps.
Hey 3DMJers, this is Andrea Valdez popping in for our annual mid-year/mid bodybuilding season call for athletes who want to compete next season in 2024. Every year without fail, we get people who contact us in January looking to compete sometime in the next 3 to 6 months. And 99% of the time, we have to turn them away or we have to convince them they need to wait another year before stepping on stage as a 3DMJ athlete. This is because natural competitive bodybuilding cannot be a rushed job. There's a long-term strategy and process to making every contest prep pay off, and we're in the business of building athletic careers. We are not in the business of crash diets, quick transformations, or creating disordered eating behaviors. It's our mission to provide our athletes with the best possible chance of success, and to do that, we have time-intensive systems. Once you submit an application, it'll likely take 2 to 6 weeks before you have your initial onboarding video call with your 3DMJ coach. They'll likely run you through an initial block or two of baseline training and nutrition to build a relationship and learn your body. You'll likely have a contest prep positioning phase or a diet before the diet. And then there will likely be a small maintenance phase as well before the actual contest prep diet home stretch finally initiates. In short, we don't do 12-week rapid transformations. We build educated athletes for the long haul, and that takes time. All that's to say, if you're looking to compete in 2024, you need to hop on our rosters as soon as possible. To do that, go to 3dmusclejourney.com/coaching. There, you'll find a summary of our procedures and pricing and links to specific FAQ pages to help you learn more about what to expect. Again, that's 3dmusclejourney.com/coaching to check out our info pages and get yourself signed up. Thanks so much for listening and enjoy the rest of the show.
I think it's important we're kind of talking about these nuances because if maybe someone's listening to this that's newer, intermediate, they're kind of just hearing you talk about, oh, he just got to work harder and pound more. Like, that's not always the solution. And
No.
would you say in most cases, not saying it's going to be opposite, but it's not going to require the type of nuance that we have to do for you?
Absolutely not.
That's a big concern that I have. Like, people listen to this, oh, I'm going to start doing more.
Exactly.
And I would say, like, more times than not, I'm actually pulling people back because they're probably just doing a little too much. And the thing is, they're doing too much too soon, so they don't really know themselves well enough. I'd rather start someone conservative, keep things fairly static, and then assess as you go. And kind of like, this was how many years process that we're talking? It's like,
This is my 19th year of training. Joe.
exactly.
And even more importantly is there's 2 other big factors that contributed to my look that are totally independent of my training. And that's basically you and Berto. So one, Berto is my like nutrition coach basically for this season. And, you know, it's very collaborative because it's outcome based. We've talked about this in my contest prep vlog. And he's leveraging my experience as an athlete. So it's not like he's just telling me what to do. But I come to him and I say each week with my check-in like normal, and I'm going, here's what I'm thinking, here's what I'm seeing, you know, let me know because I'm not very objective right now. And twice he's prevented me from dieting harder than I otherwise would have and gone, you know what, I think your body weight's just hanging on. I think you're just a little blurry. I think we shouldn't strike here because September, we got to make it all the way to Worlds in November. And he's done everything perfectly as far as a muscle and fullness retention.
That's important.
It is.
Because let's say you dug too hard for a month, 2 month stretch, like maybe you did lose some size.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you don't have that feedback of like, okay, everything I did worked.
Yeah.
Now you're kind of thinking that maybe it didn't work.
Yes. So, I mean, who's to say that if I had pushed myself for another 4 weeks of hard dieting, that I would have had the fullness in the right spaces, in the right places to display that? The other thing I did was that I got a really good posing session from you, and we specifically worked on every single pose, and we found ways to improve a lot of those poses for me that improve my symmetry. And that's what you present to judges. It's not just getting in a DEXA scan or doing a 3D scanner of you.
That's that 1%, right? Because a lot of bodybuilders, they'll put, like, just imagine this, like you put, we're not talking the last 4 years, but 19 years worth of work, and you don't really consider posing as part of the picture. You get on stage, you don't know how to present it. It's like you're kind of hiding all that work you did. So I think putting a heavy emphasis in your presentation, like actually taking the time to learn how to pose and practice it, you want to present that because that could be the difference between winning or losing. I mean, that happened to me on a couple occasions where I won shows from the posing. Like the judge's feedback was like, the reason we gave you the win was because of your presentation.
Yeah.
So that could be like the 1% that people aren't willing to put in to become quote unquote advanced or elite.
I completely agree. And in my specific case, my side relaxed and my back lat spread, I would say, went from being bad poses to, well, side relax wasn't bad. They went from being okay poses to good. And once we got my back, sorry, not my back relaxed, my back lat spread. Once we got my back lat spread sorted, I was like, oh, there is my back improvements. Because I was actually thinking, oh, whatever I did for my delts worked, but my lats, it didn't work. And then once we kind of got me back to knowing how to perform a back lat spread and then improved upon it even more, that tends to be the pose I kind of forget how to do off season to in season. Then I could see like, wow, that's the widest I've ever been. Because the funny thing is, I don't think the front lat spread actually shows your lats very well. It's basically just like a delt chest and arms pose.
Pretty much. And that's actually like most people, like they'll worry about the lat. I can't see my lats. I'm like, and they all try to emphasize that, and it throws their taper off. Because now their delts aren't in the proper positioning, so you don't get that taper.
Yeah. So probably the best poses to assess your back development are your back relaxed and, well, at least your lat development, I should say, is your back relaxed and your back lat spread. And I saw that my back relax had improved. That was something I definitely noticed this year. But I could not see why it wasn't showing up in my back lat spread, and the issue was posing.
Yes.
So once you sorted that out, all of a sudden I was like, damn, everything I did worked. Like I can clearly see on my front lat spread that my delts have improved, and I can clearly see on my back relax, my back lat spread that my lats improved. So it's, at this level for me, it's thinking about things on that fine of a detail. Like, okay, how do I make my front double bicep, which is now my weakest pose, in my opinion, or something.
That's your strongest.
It's not my strongest. How do I improve that? You know? But going back to what you were saying is, you know, we don't want people just to think it's more is better. It's targeted and it's individualized. So Jeff, obviously, I think you probably made the biggest noticeable changes in your physique that I saw from when we met you to 2014, where you won a pro show and you won, you fourth place at Worlds behind 3 now world champions.
They're crazy physiques, man.
Cleveland Thomas, Siobhan Cunningham, and Levi Burge. All 3 of them have won world championship titles in the most prestigious organizations. And they were the only ones who beat you that year in the middleweights. So that was one of the most stacked middleweight classes we've ever seen in Worlds. You were right there in the top 5. And you did that in your mid-40s, even older than I am now. So for you, it was a very different process. What did that look like?
That process was, yeah, definitely different. So if you recall, like when I met you guys, it was predominantly just HIIT, like for 16 years. So low volume, high intensity, which now in hindsight, I think was very productive for me. I think the major changes that we made in my approach was more on the nutritional front, like a big picture approach to that. Because in the past, I would over diet. I would just eat up tissue. So I was coming into shows 160 pounds shredded. That's how I got my pro card. But I had no business being 160 pounds shredded. I should have been 170 because we went from 2009 to 2011. I was 10 pounds heavier on stage. And if you recall, everybody's like, this guy's juicing. There's no way this 40-year-old put 10 pounds of muscle on in 2 years. It wasn't that I was like gaining muscle. I think I just learned how to retain muscle. So it totally changed my physique. And I would say, like, I think the biggest change, like, if we think training, as far as improving my physique, would have been my hamstrings were good back then, but like the glutes, just like the size of the glutes, the quads, like just overall size, I just wasn't doing any like good hinging patterns. And the ones I was doing, it wasn't very productive. So you combine quality of training with not that great of nutrition, you know, losing too quickly. I just didn't have that development. So we started incorporating like hybrid deadlifts, proper RDLs, things of that nature, and just focusing on more performance, because back in the HIIT days, it wasn't really focusing on performance too much. Like, let me try to increase the loads or the reps. It was just more about failure.
Yeah.
At all costs. And I think I was just running myself into the ground. So I think the training just got a little more targeted on that. And also my back too. That's another you remember that day we were in the gym and I was doing bent over rows and you're like, Jeff, why don't you try rack rows? I don't even know what a rack row was back in 2009. So we started implementing that, and it just improved the overall quality of the back training, along with like some learning more about cadence and things like that, controlling the loads. So I think those are the major things, and it just transformed like my whole posterior chain.
Yeah.
I think that was probably the biggest thing.
Mm.
Incorporating refeeds, that type of thing as well.
Taking creatine.
Yeah, that helped too.
Yeah.
I put it like, that was like 2 or 3 pounds on me after I started doing that. Yeah, but yeah, and then just the whole diet approach. That I think that's the biggest thing. Like that muscle retainment was just so key.
Yeah. Yeah, there was that's a very different list, and there was no targeted
Yeah, there was
specialization
no
cycle.
like, okay, we need to bring up your back, so let's do more. More is like, I need to learn how to properly train back. Because before it was like just bent over rows, and then like pull downs were always heavy.
Yeah.
So there's like a lot of arms. So I just really didn't know how to train back properly. So for me, what worked was just cleaning up the execution.
Yeah.
The form. And I responded to that. So I kind of noticed like, okay, I don't need to do more volume or more frequency. I just needed to correct my quality of training and be more specific with like exercises that were more catered to me at the time.
Yeah, and that is something that I think, you mentioned earlier. You were like, your performance is really good in terms of the quality of your work. And if that wasn't getting it done, then you probably need to do more if you're recovered. And I think that's a really key thing I don't want any of the intermediates entering the advanced stage to miss. If you're just looking back at my experience where I did lower volume, higher intensity, and you're like, oh, you lost size up top, you need more volume. I think what you're probably missing is that I really did refine my exercise execution under the tutelage of Jeff. And that's something that I think is far more valuable than most people recognize, because that is probably a really important first step, and it lays the groundwork for if you need more volume, you want to make sure that your exercise execution is pristine first, or otherwise you're throwing slop on it, and you're probably at best it's far less efficient than it could be. You think you need 20 sets, but you could actually get it done with 15 of higher quality, or at worst, you're doing a higher volume of something that might actually aggravate some things, cause injury, or just have this level of fatigue that you can't properly recover from, and you can't get to the quality volume you need to see that progress. So while volume was the answer for me, and frequency and training closer to failure,
but it wasn't sloppy training, though.
No.
You had your quality you needed to prove first.
Yes. And I'm very happy to say that my exercise execution and technique has improved over time. If you find old videos of me powerlifting, you can see my knees knocking.
That's what I was going to say. Like if you go back, even me, like if you go back to that 2009, 2010 era where we were kind of just getting to know each other, we look back at all those form videos, even Alberto's, like some of those, I'm like, what were we doing?
Yes.
Like it's totally just improved over the years.
Yeah. I feel I'm not on the Godfather level yet, but I feel like I am objectively a very good performer in terms of
your reps are all standard though.
Yeah.
Like we could talk about style, right? Like I have a style, you have a style, but I think both of us are really good at like making sure that everything is very consistent with our reps. I think that's more important than like making sure like everything's just super pristine from A to B.
Yes.
Because there's going to be people out there going to be like, well, come on, man. You can
Could improve.
Look at Ronnie Coleman. You know, he's look how jacked he was. I mean, you can look at his form and go, oh, it wasn't all that great.
Yeah. But it was consistent.
Exactly.
Ronnie did make each one of his, grunty reps look the same,
Like if I did Ronnie Coleman's form, I'd probably injure myself.
Yeah.
And if he did my form, maybe he wouldn't progress like Ronnie Coleman.
He at least wouldn't enjoy it. I can tell you that much.
There you go.
Having met the man and watched him train.
And
he likes to sling weights around.
And you're training 19 years now. I'm 37. So obviously we like what we're doing.
Yeah.
Like if we didn't like it, then we wouldn't keep doing it.
Yep.
So I think it's important that we do have like kind of like our personalities. Like I think sometimes we watch people train, their personalities come out through they're expressing it through the way they move.
Yeah. And let's face it, bodybuilding is not just a sport, it's also an art. And that means you just have to marry up those two concepts. So if my technique was actually holding me back, I'd modify it. And then
like my rows.
Exactly.
Yep.
And I'd modify it, and then my expression would come into it. But I think a lot of people, and I'm not critiquing them for this, they work through things emotionally. They let their personality maybe play too dominant of a role to the point where if they're competing or if they really do want to see progress, it's holding them back. So that's why it's really good to have coaches, to have colleagues, to have people in your corner. And I feel very grateful for that. So anyway, I guess my point is that you need a foundation of quality training in terms of execution before you start exploring a higher volume approach or even a higher intensity approach.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that I think we both had, and you have experimented with higher volume, and it was not the solution for you.
It was counterproductive. It was kind of opposite of what you got out of it. So I ended up just getting more fatigued and more beat up. And, a couple months of that, I was like, okay, I need to kind of revert back to where I was, because obviously this is actually leading me down a bad place, because I didn't want to be beat up. So I kind of learned and the way I would do it was like kind of like the traditional, let's ramp up the set volume, each week, and then we'll deload. So I did that. I gave that a good shot, and I didn't see any like physical improvements. Like I didn't see any added size or anything that. But I'll say this though, like, because before I ran HIIT, I was more of like that 6-day-a-week guy, and that my volume was a lot higher, and I didn't really see a lot of progress from it. And when I did HIIT, I started seeing a lot of progress. So right away, I was like, okay, this is what I should be doing all the time.
Mm.
But the thing with that is when I went to HIIT, I started eating a lot more food.
Mm.
So I had, the supply and demand was basically like the supply was outpacing the demand. Now the question is, what if I would have eaten a lot more when I was doing 6 days a week, when I was, those were my younger days? Would I have seen just as much progress? I don't know. It's quite possible though, because
Well, I think you tried it twice, basically. You had that lower volume initial dogmatic approach to HIIT that worked better while you were eating. And then when you met us, you did increase your volume. You tried a 2-day upper-lower split, basically doubled your volume with us for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And you were eating. That was in the off season, and it didn't really pay off.
I think the off season, it was just similar. It looked similar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would say in both of our cases, there's been multiple experiments of trying the other way. And honestly, my legs understand what your experience has been. Because I've gone on high volume powerlifting programs. I did Olympic weightlifting while I was powerlifting. I took the same approach for my lower body that I was with my upper body for many years from bodybuilding, like 2 days a week lower body with all those, probably, 9 sets per exercise. Sorry, 9 sets per muscle group per each one of those sessions. And the difference was my SI joint felt worse with higher volume, but nothing else.
Yep.
And I could progress my lifts, the look of my muscles, and my just general, like all the indicators I have of whether I was getting a good stimulus were the same. And I just never got anything more out of higher volume lower body training. And then I had another experiment with it where I got hip surgery. And when I got back into just doing like singles and a little bit here and front squats and really trying to train around a double labral tear that got repaired and, shaving off my FAI, I was shocked at how little it took for me to get back to my prior strength levels and what my legs looked like afterwards. They didn't atrophy. There was no shrinking. I was doing some other work that I could do on the side, but my lower body is essentially HIIT responsive.
Right.
And honestly, not even the failure. I just don't need that much, right? And I'm sure I could do a little bit more and actively make them progress, but the threshold for my lower body is way lower. And my lower body joints don't like doing, nobody's do, right? But you try to make me do what Tom Platz does and I'd be injured within a week.
Yeah.
Most people would. But the point being is, this is going to be body part dependent. It's going to be individual dependent, and it's going to change for you over the course of your career. But there's a lot more that goes into it. For example, what you retain, we both noticed made a big difference. And also the ability to present it. So in competitive bodybuilding, in the end, the only thing that matters is what do you look like on stage. And I think we just can't hyper focus on any one of these factors to the point where we think that is what's going to make the difference. You can put on 10 pounds on your stage weight, but if your posing is pretty crap, it's going to seem like way less than that.
Yeah.
And you will get beat by people who are objectively worse physiques, but better bodybuilders than you.
I've beaten much bigger men. I've seen lightweights beat heavyweights at the Mayhem.
Yep.
Because heavyweight did not know how to pose at all, and that lightweight probably would end up losing if that heavyweight knew how to pose.
Shout out Marvin,
Yeah.
Hong Kong.
He looked great that day.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah. What about like, because you're 40 now.
I am.
You're not a young buck no more, and I'm 52. So how much more potential do you think you have? Because, you know, everybody wants to say that 5-year window. You know, it's not worth being natural. You know, if you're, you know, after 5 years, you don't make no progress. So what's your thoughts on that?
Man, this experience for me has really pushed back against that, because even if it is objectively true that my stage weight may only go up by, let's say, 1 or 2 kilos throughout my whole career, maybe, I don't know. One thing that I was thinking about, and I was mentioning off camera with you, is that once I get my upper body, if I can get it even bigger, I might actually need to bring my quads up, because it'll help my waist look even smaller. Now, if I put size on my quads, that might actually increase my muscle mass a bit, you know? The times I've noticed that people's stage weights go up is when they go from having chicken legs to big legs.
Makes sense. Bigger muscles, right?
Exactly. You're talking about improving 60% of your muscle mass in your body. So, you know, if I went through a period where I took an off season to make my quads bigger, I might gain it.
You might see the scale go up a little bit.
Yeah. But like if we're talking about adding the muscle mass that we were discussing, you know, last night, of me getting a little more upper chest development.
Yeah.
I'm not going to see that on the scale.
No, you're not.
If I go from having...
You're not even going to see it on your physique in the off season, because you're going to be carrying too much body fat to probably even see the differences there.
Exactly. So I'm going to have to commit to doing a lot of inclining and incline flies. And
you know what the key word you just said right now, right?
Commit.
You said commit, right? And
Exactly.
that's super key.
Yeah. Ultimately, it's I'm not going to be able to, and this is the scary part, know whether it's going to pay off until the next time I get on stage in, I don't know, 2026 or something like that.
Exactly. So it's not motivation or the actual progress. It's more the commitment to try to make that progress.
Yes. And you know what's exciting to me is the possibility that it will work, because I gained confidence from the last 2 seasons of seeing myself improve at this stage. So a lot of this is figuring out your own psychology to make yourself able to commit to doing something consistently without feedback that you're going to then see a handful of years from now after crushing yourself with a diet to see the progress.
You know what's, something we didn't talk about either is that I don't know if I've made progress or not just by that one photo I posted online. Possible, right? But I've learned so much more about natural bodybuilding in the process, going just the attempts and trying to do that versus, let's say, someone who's maybe in their first year and they see a bunch of gains.
Yeah.
Because it comes easy. Like whatever you do works. So, but when you're trying to do what you're doing the last 3 or 4 years, like look how much knowledge you've gained and wisdom you've gained, like actually going through that process.
Yeah.
So even though let's say I don't make any more progress moving ahead, I still have to have a lot of intention on trying to, at the very least, maintain what I have. And there's a lot of value there. There's a lot of reward there too.
Yeah.
Because I'm 52 years old and I'm not too shabby for 52.
Yep.
So in order for me to keep enjoying this physique, I got to keep doing the things that I've been doing and trying to improve upon them, because my body's getting older. It is getting more hard to keep my training productive, and the recovery aspect. I noticed that's one thing. It's a little more challenging. Like I can't just get in there, on any given day and just kind of blast through things.
Yeah.
Like I actually have to pay attention to my body. I think as an advanced athlete, like that's what you get more in tune to. It's like you're not really referring to a piece of paper as much.
Yep.
Or what it says on the Excel sheet. You're like, okay, it says this, but let me see how it goes. So I go set to set basis. Sometimes I get in there, I'll do a set, and like that just didn't feel great, and I'll have to abandon the exercise and find something else.
Yeah.
So you're not going to gain that type of knowledge and wisdom, like just when things come really easy.
And you won't gain the confidence either. I think a big part of the reason why many young athletes don't adjust their plan when they might otherwise benefit from doing so if they had the same kind of experience is not that they're not listening to their bodies. Sometimes they're not. They're not in tune with their bodies. Sometimes they're not. A lot of the times it's because they can get away with not changing it, and they're afraid of changing it.
Say it's fear-based oftentimes.
They don't know what is their threshold before they actually see a regression. They're afraid of taking a week off for a vacation. But when you've gone through injuries, when you've gone through time off, when you've gone through experiments of lower volume and higher volume, and you see the way your body responds, there is so much less fear creeping into your decision-making process that you can actually start to leverage your intuition and your auto-regulation based upon the feedback you're getting. So for me, you know, you said now that I'm not a spring chicken anymore, I don't honestly at 40 yet feel different than my 20s.
I'll say, yeah. I mean, I feel older, but I'm still very capable.
Yeah.
When the days are like feeling good, I'm like very capable of performing pretty well.
Yeah.
But I am more strategic with
Yes.
like the dose and the recovery aspect. So when I was younger, it was just more like I'd be sick. Like I would literally like have a slight fever, and I'm like fearful of like not training because I'm gonna lose out on some gains, and I would actually train.
Yeah.
With HIIT, mind you, and the next day I'm wrecked. Made it worse. So it kind of holds me back even further by doing that.
Yeah, you can even make decisions that are counterproductive. I mean, how often when we talk about taking a deload with a diet break, you know, during prep, or people like, oh my God, you know, and they're not thinking of it from a I need recovery standpoint. They're thinking of it from a, oh, I'm already dieting. That's going to make me lose muscle. Deloads make me lose muscle. Like, oh my God. So it's this kind of thing where, you know, people start doing things where they don't want to deload during contest prep. And you have a fatiguing, you know, environment and process, and then a fatigue management tool, and they can't be mixed together. It's not logical. It's fear-based. So it's that's absolutely something that I think gets cured when you have gone through this process of experimentation and you know what your limits are, because then you don't have to rely on other people telling you something, or a coach, or you hoping you have that experiential knowledge that gives you confidence. And you said that many times, that experience cures insecurity. And I think that's an example of what we're talking about. So for me, I don't feel that my body is much different. I mean, I have accumulated some wear and tear. Like I said, I've had that the surgery. I have had numerous injuries throughout my career, nothing major besides needing that one. I've had back injuries, I've had neck injuries, but it's not necessarily anything related to my age. It's related to the years of time training.
Good point.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times the injuries I've had isn't because the age factor.
Yeah.
Like tearing my calf, that had everything to do with like just too much load.
Yeah.
Or like some of the aches and pains I develop, it's more so from a repetitive use, not like something acute where I'm like, oh, that hurt.
Yeah.
So it's very rare I get that, oh, that hurt.
Mm-hmm.
It's more so the repetitive wear and tear. So I think it's like, for me, I really think about how I'm managing like the volume, the dose, the frequency, making sure rest days are an equal part of the process. You know, some people might just need one, other people might need 3 or 4. And that actually evolves too. Like the way I do things, like some days I'm training 3 days a week, some days it's 4. On a very rare occasion, it might be 5. But I kind of think, okay, if I'm doing 5 days a week, then I'm gonna keep things down here more. If it's 2 days a week, then I'm gonna increase the intensity. So it's just, you're kind of just picking your spots, like a good boxer, right?
Absolutely. And that's actually something I wanted to bring up. You know, when people think of traditional 3DMJ training, they think a lot of free weight training. They think a lot of, which is great as your basic template. If you read my books, you know, that's in there. But for me right now, when I'm doing bodybuilding purely, I train 5 or 6 days a week. And the way that I accommodate the fact that I'm also doing a high volume specialized focus, so I'm getting a lot of repetitive use for specific joints on muscle groups I'm trying to improve, I actually do a ton of machine work.
Yeah.
So I don't think people realize this because I haven't done like full training vlogs in a while, but outside of the squat, bench, and deadlift that I only really focus on when I am trying to power lift, the majority of my training, not some or a portion, the majority of my training is actually machines and cables.
Right.
And I find that is the best way that I can reach the volumes and achieve the proximities to failure, and also get into those lengthened positions safely, where I can pile on all that volume.
Right.
But if someone is thinking, oh, he's doing a delt back and specialization cycle, he's going to be doing, let's say like this next off season, I'm doing a lot of incline work and delt work and back work. If you're thinking I'm doing barbell overhead press, barbell incline press, and bent over rows, you're wrong. I'm probably not doing any of those 3.
That's going to be short-lived.
Exactly. What I will be doing is a fair amount of cable work for my delts, a lot of machine and cable work for my back, and then a mixture of There's actually a really good three-dimensional Smith machine that I really like for pressing, because it doesn't lock you into one plane, but it's also really easy to get into a deep position safely and has a smoother resistance profile. I like to use that for my pressing, and I really do like deep dumbbell position work with partials, and those I find are far easier on my like AC joint and like my shoulder joint as a whole than a lot of the other options. And a lot of overhead pressing, it crushes me. I learned that from Olympic lifting. I used to get a neck injury every 6 weeks to 3 months because there's no overhead position option in Olympic lifting.
Right.
So, doing high incline presses, but not a whole lot of direct overhead pressing, and then a whole lot of lateral raise variations, and then direct rear delt work has really been what's useful for me. So I think it's, for me personally, I have found that it's not so much the volume or the intensity, but the movement that I really have to pay attention to so that I can accumulate the amount of work that I have to.
Right. So we've talked like the training aspect quite heavy, but as far as like these improvements are obviously going to come when you're in a well-fed state. How much food is actually needed too? So I think this is important because people like they'll think like, okay, I need to eat more, I need to gain a lot of weight in order to make these gains.
Yeah.
Like sometimes your body weight doesn't even need to change and you'll make improvements to your physique. So maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I think sometimes we think of like, oh, what's my training age? Am I an intermediate, a novice, or advanced? And that's not really the way physiology works. That's like a useful heuristic. But the reality is, if you find someone who's been training like a bro and they've got a massive body and they got no legs, are their legs advanced?
Yeah.
No.
That was me in high school. I didn't train legs. I trained all upper body. I had these chicken legs.
And that's true of like many, many people in one way or another. So yeah, they might need to think about the same things we just talked about if they want to make their upper body progress. But just simply consistently training legs at all will make their lower body progress. And they probably could eat in a larger surplus. And the message of like the basics is really important for everyone who's an intermediate or novice. Eat in a surplus, eat enough protein, progressive overload, moderate volume, decent intensity, good exercise execution. And that's literally the answer for everyone.
And the size and length of the surplus is going to depend on a lot of factors.
Yeah, if you can gain 20 pounds, then yeah, and you can eat a lot. But if we're talking about trying to put 50 grams of tissue on the upper portion of your chest over a year and a half, what is a massive surplus going to do me? Probably not a lot.
So an advanced lifter like you and I, like that's going to be counterproductive.
Yeah, and ultimately, the nutrition question for guys at our stage is more of what's the overall best environment for my goals. So what's an appropriate amount over stage weight that I need to get to where I am functioning well and I'm healthy. All of my blood work looks normal and I'm not so high in body fat that it's going to make next contest season harder.
Or just if you're not a competitive bodybuilder, just like a cutting phase.
Yeah, absolutely.
So basically an environment where there's good energy to perform, good performance, good recovery.
Health, yep.
You're not food focused. I think that's super important.
Yep. Mental health as well.
You're just functioning well in and out of the gym.
Yeah.
In all facets.
So for me, an interesting thing, and this is unrelated to the discussion we've had, but it is actually something related to being an advanced athlete. Because I would, like, if you look at our recovery diet, it's gain, 5 to 10% over stage weight within a couple months. I'm probably going to do something a little more like a reverse diet because of my powerlifting experience this year, where I was able to compete as an 83 and actually improve my numbers, and I felt fine.
Right.
And, like, if you look back at my pictures, and I sent you one from when I was 15 years old, I was always a skinny kid with abs. And it wasn't until I found bodybuilding and kind of hit my novice plateau where all the advice from the magazines and, IFBB pros was eat 4,000 calories a day minimum in the off season. And I managed to push myself up to a body fat level far higher than I'd ever been to, and a body weight that was clearly in excess of my development and even where I would need to be today.
All right.
So for a guy who's 6 foot, if you look at on paper from powerlifting community to bodybuilding community, they would tell you I need to be, at least 100 kilos at my peak off season.
So you need to be 220.
Exactly. 100 kilos, 220, right? And then, you diet down to 190. But I compete as a top of the middle weights. I'm like 175 to 180 when I'm shredded. And that's not without lack of trying. I mean, the number of times I've bulked, you've seen it over the years. I had to cut weight one year to make the 220 or 100 kilo weight class, you know? So that was after I got up to 226 after my first season. And so for me, each off season, I've gotten a little lighter. Yet we've seen me improve on stage. Sometimes with my stage weight going up. So I know I don't need to be in a massive surplus. And I know that when I'm actually having good nutritional habits and I don't crush myself with the diet, the place where I am comfortable is actually a little leaner than I previously thought was possible. So for me, I actually want to explore hanging out only, say, 10 to 15 pounds over stage weight and see what that looks like for me. I don't know if that'll be successful, but I'm willing to experiment because I think if I get up to, so right now I'm around 80 kilos, just under. If I get up to 85, 86 and as a stable weight, which means probably 1.5 kilos of fullness and food bulk, but it's really only gaining 10 pounds of body fat from stage weight. That's not what I'd recommend for 9 out of 10 competitors. But I do wonder if that actually is in the cards for me. And then the question will be, because I know I have the nutritional knowledge, experience, and relationship with my body and food to do that, is will that be too lean? Because in 2011, I did something similar, but I kind of did it with a very radical approach. I was doing like UD2 bulking. And it was all this kind of, it wasn't habit-based. I was like tracking carbs and it became annoying.
Great.
It felt too lean, but I don't know how much of that was stress-related. So the experiment this off-season is to gain 10 pounds of legit body fat. And I'm going to do that relatively quickly, but it's going to be like a truncated recovery diet and then a slow transition into just slightly higher calories and then see how I do moving from like, say, 85 to 88 and then cutting back down.
What time frame do you think this is?
I think I can, well, I mean, you know, the way
coming off prep, like it's going to take, you know, a month, 2 months, 3 months to kind of get that weight up.
Exactly.
Regain fullness, regain some of your performance, because you do lose a little bit of performance.
Absolutely.
So you got to recoup all that. So you often hear some bodybuilders say, oh, I put on this much muscle in the first month since prep. I'm like, you're probably just recapturing things that maybe kind of lost along the way.
So to be honest, I think most of that's just fullness. I don't think they start recovering muscle mass until they actually get healthy again, you know?
Exactly.
So I suspect, you know, my body weight might get down to 78, 79 when I'm all the way lean and then repleted a bit going into Worlds. So we're talking mid-November. I think probably what my plan is to get up to about 83 within a month. That'll be about 1.5 kilos of just bloat, fullness, and food bulk. And then another 2.5 kilos, 3 kilos exactly of actual body fat gained. And then I'm going to slow it down. And I'm just going to have a slow march towards about 86.
So we're probably talking literally close to a year, maybe. Before you, maybe 9 months, somewhere in there, 6 months, maybe at the minimum.
Like,
whether this experiment is actually going to be a good environment for you to train in.
Yeah, sometime around July, is in my head where I will be like, okay, now I'm at 85, 86. Do I feel good? Because I'll know really quick if it didn't work.
Right.
If I'm at 85 and 86 in July and I still feel dieted, okay, I should have just done what I did in 2019 and got up to 90 kilos in 2 months. You know, because I felt great quick in 2019. Right. By December, after being in August, I wouldn't have known that I dieted. So if we're talking 2 more months on top of that and I still feel dieted, it was a failed experiment. But I'm willing to try and fail, you know?
That's how we figured out your upper body, right?
That's right. You know, and there's a cost to it. And I get people are fearful for that, but the cost is worth it in my opinion because it'll inform the whole rest of my career. And based upon seeing you,
I was just going to say, like,
crushing it at 52.
There you go. You still have time.
I got a decade, so, or more.
I know what's interesting for me is that after 2019, like in my mind, I was kind of like, I don't know if I can progress or not. I'm going to give it an attempt. I remember I had like, okay, this offseason, I'll make it one last little push to see if I could actually accrue some muscle. And I still don't know if I have or not. And it's 4 years later too. But moving ahead, it's like, okay, at 52, I think I'm doing okay. So why can't I do this at 53 or 54 or 55? I know Father Time at some point will catch up. But I mean, I can look out there and see like Chris Jantz. Who's 55 or 6.
Shout out.
Best physique ever and winning shows. Like just
Steve Subcliffe.
yeah, 56. And I remember seeing him in the Natural Bodybuilding magazines back in the day, and he's still doing it, and he's on a high level.
Yep.
So, like, oftentimes when I'm coaching people, you know, they'll say, "Oh man, I'm getting old." I'm like, "Dude, you're only 30 years old. Like, you still have 2 decades ahead of you, or possibly more."
Yeah.
And I even thought, like, man, I don't need extended off season anymore. I'm like, maybe I'm rethinking that. Like Richard Kroll is another example. He's 55 and he just crushed it. And the last time he competed was like, what, 7, 8, 9 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, I even joked with him online. I'm like, hey, maybe we do have some off seasons left. You know?
Yeah.
So you never know. So,
and for a second, I'm just going to put my science officer hat on, because this has basically been Eric, the athlete, which has been fun to really just kind of embrace that. But there are so many misconceptions related to age. So, for example, there's a huge metabolic database now based upon doubly labeled water that has shown that when you correct for factors like activity and changes in body composition, your energy expenditure doesn't drop until you hit 60. There's more data than that too. Like, for example, the whole anabolic resistance that we learn about, like, oh, when you're older, you need more protein. Well, you know, that actually, that effect goes away when you look at samples from Nordic countries, which are more highly active. You are much more similar if you're currently lifting now between your 50s and 60s to yourself when you were lifting in your 20s than you would be to your peers who haven't lifted for the last 30 years. Now, of course, Father Time will catch us all, but there's so much data like this. Another piece of data is really cool, that the average age of when people hit their peak powerlifting performance is 35, but the standard deviation is plus or minus 7, which means that if the most of the bell curve distribution is 28 to 42. And that's a big gap. And that's not bodybuilding, that's powerlifting, right? And that also doesn't mean that you're not going to improve anymore. It just means that people who started and have multiple competitions under their belt, there's plenty of them are improving into their 40s. And again, that is powerlifting, which is joint limited.
Right.
To get creative, it's very different. And finally, the piece of data that I think is most misquoted and based upon nothing in like kind of the YouTube and Instagram and fitness space where everyone's trying to sell you TRT, is that testosterone starts going down in your 30s. And that's just false. The really interesting data that's out there is when you correct for activity. If someone is staying active, stays healthy, and they don't get heavier over time, which most people are slowly sliding towards a higher body mass over time, they're gaining more body fat and they're being less active. Again, you have to correct for those factors. If you're not getting higher body fat over time, and if you're not getting less active over time, there's data to suggest that even in your 50s to your 60s, there's not a meaningful change in testosterone. So we're talking about less than a 10% shift. And also, really importantly, is we have this obsession with testosterone in bodybuilding because of the IFBB and the effects of steroids. But what we see is that testosterone within the normal ranges is not predictive of how big you are or how much gains you're going to get. And if that gives you a knee-jerk reaction, just think about this. Women and men gain the same amount of proportional lean mass from resistance training. And women have a fraction of what we have. So I'm not saying muscle mass isn't important. I'm sorry, I'm not saying testosterone isn't important and doesn't affect muscle mass, or puberty wouldn't look different for men and women.
Right.
But it gives you that bump, and then you're maintaining this normal level, and after that, it is other factors that dominate. Yes, if you go down 100 nanograms, you know, per deciliter, I think that's I'm now that I live in New Zealand, I forget the different conversion factors, but your typical American scale is like normal is 300 to 900 or something like that. If you shift up a full 100, you might see a 1 pound difference in your body mass. And we're talking about changes, like I said, 10%. That's a 30 to 90 point change. It's less than that. So we're talking about.
But this is someone who is actually training and doing things correctly.
Exactly. So,
which, let's face it, not everybody does that.
No, you take the average person when they're 30 and then you track them until they're 55, they might have a far lower testosterone level, but they're also going to have a higher waistline and less muscle mass because they're less active than they were in their 20s and 30s. They've had more time to lose muscle mass from being inactive. It's the accumulated years.
So it's possible someone with like quarter or half the testosterone level, if they are maintaining good habits, they're training with intent, they're eating properly, they're sleeping, they're doing all these things as a good bodybuilder would do, they could definitely surpass someone who has double the amount of testosterone if that person doesn't have as much
It
of the
happens.
good habits.
It happens all the time. Like if you were to take people on a bodybuilding stage and you were just to test all the testosterones, I bet you there would be zero correlation between placing or even muscle mass and their testosterone, or it'd be like 0.0 something. Because again, it doesn't even work like that when you look between the sexes. And it also doesn't predict how well you're going to respond to training. Now, yeah, if you start injecting 10 to 40 times the natural amount, that'll change things. It's like going through puberty again, but it's just simply not predictive. There might be slight baseline differences. It is a factor, but it's not the largest factor. And if you stay active, more importantly, is that your testosterone is simply not going to go down to any meaningful degree unless there's some other kind of clinical thing going on until you're well into your 50s or 60s. And Jeff, it would not surprise me if you did blood work after contest prep. Don't do it now.
Right.
And you could compare yourself to when you were 28. There might be a 10% difference now, even though it is over 20 years later. So that's a huge myth that gets continually repeated. It's pervasive. It's financially motivated with everyone being, a TRT affiliate and the ease of it. But it is absolutely a myth.
So I get that a lot. I get people like asking if I take it because they just assume, well, you're 52. Look at you.
Yeah, you
like,
can't
how
look
can you
like
be
this.
like that at 52.
Yeah.
I've literally have been consistent in training for 37 years. I've only had a 4-month layoff at one point.
Yeah,
that was it. I mean, I had maybe a week here, a week there, but no long stints. Like my training has always been consistent.
Yeah.
And when my nutrition wasn't consistent, I wasn't under eating. I was overeating too much. So obviously that's a better environment than under eating.
Absolutely. So I'll take the science officer hat off, but just to kind of recap things, advancing.
There we go. I wear that well.
You look good on it. It looks good on you. Yeah. So just to recap, testosterone only goes down if you're not doing the things to stay healthy. And even when it does start going down, it's not occurring until probably, on average, I would guess, late 50s or 60. Same thing with metabolic expenditure. And, injuries can crop up, but with bodybuilding, it's great because you can train around them. So the peak age for powerlifting is probably lower than the peak age for bodybuilding. And we see this example all the time. And for those who would say, well, those guys are just on drugs and they're cheating, as Omar Issa said in his recent video, you just failed the IQ test because there's no reason that the younger guys can't also be cheating in the natural organizations. So we should still see the younger guys coming out on top if that was the case. So I think I'll leave a pin in that. But the point is that your ability to progress as a late stage athlete, it is absolutely true that you're probably going to see 80% of your gains if you're doing things even mostly right in the first 5 years of lifting. But you're going to get disproportionate visual improvements from the last 20%, but it might take you another 15 years. So I think that should both be motivating and at least a reason to commit to the process and not to focus on just the outcomes. And in the meantime, maybe lean into the artistic expression of bodybuilding or the habits that it teaches you or the life lessons or the structure it can provide or the ability to simply express yourself as we talked about, because there's so much more richness to get out of this than simply pounds on the scale or inches on your arms. And I'm going to get off my soapbox and leave it there, but I'll just say that I'm probably more motivated now, or at least as motivated now as I was in 2007 when I was convincing myself that one day soon, probably way too soon, I'm going to be Mr. Natural Olympia. And now that I've actually seen my physique progress to a point that I wasn't sure I could ever achieve, and seeing that it happened this late stage in my career, I'm more motivated than ever to make these little incremental changes that may not even show up on the scale, because I know that they can make bigger changes disproportionate to what I've done. So that's where I'm at. I'm in a good place, and hopefully I think that the competitive bodybuilders who've put in a lot of work already can have some confidence that those narratives online, even if they're true to some degree, don't apply to their situation, and they're kind of different things. So I'll leave it there. Jeff, is there anything you want to leave our audience with?
I'm just enjoying being 52 and being jacked. And I'm going to continue the habits. And in 5 weeks, I'm getting on the world stage, and we'll see if we can crack a top 5 as a 52-year-old.
You know what? I would not be surprised at all if you did. And I know that no matter what, you're going to be looking incredible. So thank you for listening in, and we'll catch you next time on the 3DMJ podcast. What's going on, everybody? Eric Helms here, Chief Science Officer of 3DMJ. Thank you for listening to the podcast, and let me just take 1 second to tell you about MASS, Monthly Applications in Strength Sport. This is a monthly research review that I do with Lauren Colenso-Semple, Eric Trexler, as well as Mike Zerdos. These are experts in their field, and we cover all the information relevant to you as an athlete or coach if you're working with strength or physique athletes, or if you're a recreational or competitive athlete yourself. We cover nutrition, training, sports psychology, and health. And we do this in written format, as well as, since you like the podcast, audio summaries, as well as video concept reviews. If you're a trainer, we also have continuing education credits for ACSM, NSCA, NASM, and ACE. So head over to 3dmusclejourney.com, click on the products tab, and you can find us there. I look forward to seeing you, and enjoy the podcast.